Hours after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attacked the Philippines. Key American air bases are destroyed, wiping out all U.S. air power there. Thousands of Japanese troops invade the Philippines from all directions. General Douglas MacArthur, who has been military advisor to the Philippine government since 1935, badly overestimated the capabilities of his mostly civilian army, made up of American and Filipino forces.
Well, although we had training at the military academy, intensive training, both in tactics and military science, we were ill-prepared to go into combat. As far as the other members of the armed forces of the Philippines, they were ill-trained with equipments that were outmoded. It was of World War I model, and that was the kind of army that we had at the time when the Japanese invaded the Philippines.
As the combined Philippine-American forces defend the Philippines, Hawaii and the American mainland prepare for war.
I had a machine gun company, platoon. I had 4 guns. So I had a waterfront, Kahului War, the breakwaters. My platoon was made of American, Japanese, and also Hawaiian, Filipino, and Portuguese, or the nationality we have in Hawaii. First they came down and told us, that we're going to have to get all these Japanese boys out of your platoon. All of boys that was in the National Guard. They have to take them away and put them away some other training camp, not with us anymore. And the boys were hurt, and I was hurt. Because we were brought up, kids, we went to school. We were really close.
On the U.S. mainland, where some 135,000 Filipinos are living, thousands of immigrant men and sons of immigrants are among the first to volunteer to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces.
Many of my father's friends wanted to go in the Army immediately. They wanted to go to the Philippines to seek vengeance.
Well, the community couldn't understand why we couldn't join the United States Army. A lot of the young people, even the older people, Filipinos who were 40 years old, wanted to get into Army.
In more than a dozen cities around the country, Filipinos hold emergency mass meetings and decide to push for an all-Filipino fighting battalion. They send telegrams to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Philippine Resident Commissioner Joaquin M. Elizalde, Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall, and to members of Congress, asking that their draft status be immediately changed.
We formulated the resolution to Secretary of War Stimson that we wanted in.
In the Philippines, simultaneous Japanese landings overwhelmed General MacArthur. By Christmas, the situation looks desperate. His inexperienced army of 160,000 men are no match for the seasoned Japanese troops, even though they have fewer soldiers. Soon, MacArthur orders his men to retreat.
There was an impi. He called us, there's a war coming on, so we'll take you back to your outfit. And when I got to our barracks, they were already packing. MacArthur ordered us to go to Bataan.
As Philippine and American troops put up a last stand, without hope of reinforcements on the Bataan Peninsula, President Roosevelt orders MacArthur to leave the Philippines. His troops continue to defend their position. They will undergo one of the longest and fiercest sieges of the war.
We heard that MacArthur was going to Australia to command a larger force that would come back and drive the Japanese out of Bataan. Of course, his words of "I shall return" was reached to every soldiers in Bataan, and that gave them the spirit to really keep hanging in there in spite of the incessant attacks of the Japanese.
While fighting in Bataan, Camilo Ramirez is captured by the Japanese and held in a prison camp.
During my second night of captivity, around 2 o'clock or 2:15, that's when I got out. So I ran towards the bushes. I kept running and my head was really pounding. The fever, malaria fever and dengue fever mixed. I saw a road. I said to myself, I followed the ditch towards Manila. I went to the church and prayed, God, please get me out of this mess. And I was crying all the time. But when I walked out of the church, I felt so light, as if I was flying. I was so light.
Camilo Ramirez finds his way to Manila and boards a hospital ship bound for Australia. He arrives in Darwin and learns that General MacArthur is there. Back in Washington, President Roosevelt has approved a change to the Selective Service Act on December 20, 1941. Filipinos in the U.S. are now able to enlist in the Army. On February 23, 1942, the Filipino Infantry Battalion is officially activated in Central California. From their training camp in San Luis Obispo, word spreads across the country that volunteers are needed.
I tell you, there was practically a race to get in. I mean, I was so surprised. There was just so many that signed up almost immediately.
Well, in San Francisco, that's all we heard about. There's a Filipino organization, Army unit that was being formed in Salinas. And then all of the young fellows in our group said, when we go in the Army, if we get drafted and we go in the Army, let's all go to the first fill. And that's what we did.
I wanted to join the regiment because I remember when they were having meal, they always had rice, and part of my menu was to have rice in my meal. I grew up eating rice, and if I only ate bread, I didn't have enough stamina.
As the regiments continue their training, they keep track of the desperate situation on the Bataan Peninsula. The courage and bravery of Bataan's defenders inspire them and intensify their desire to return.
We were hoping that he'd come back with replacements and ammunition, food and all that, but that thing never came. Instead, the Japanese were the ones that got the reinforcements. And so they launched a very heavy attack on us. No way for us to retreat. So with little ammo that we have, with little food that we have, we just kept on fighting. And finally, we got the orders to surrender.